Hello, today I'm going to be talking about language brokering within Latino families and especially the impact on Latino parents and their children. So we're first going to look at the Latino population. Pew Research Center found that in 2015, 57 million people made up the Latino population within the U.S. That number is expected to at least double by the year 2050. In the map shown on the right, it shows the areas where it's heavily populated with the Latino population. And you can see that a lot of this is heavily populated in the states that border Mexico, but there's also a lot in Florida and Texas, and it's slowly growing within other states in the United States, and will continue to. When we look at English proficiency, Pew Research Center found that in 2014, 42.2 million of the Latino population were immigrants and foreign-born. Of that 42.2 million, 34% of the immigrants spoke English at least very well, and that was from ages 5 and over. The table shows the English proficiency between U.S.-born, foreign-born, and all Hispanics as a total. And you can see that the Latinos that are foreign-born are substantially lower than the U.S.-born. And so English is something that is definitely needed to be worked on and learned by these immigrants. And this brings us to language brokering. So language brokering is when a parent uses a child to interpret or translate for them. Often these immigrants, their children are going to school and learning English quicker because of this daily exposure. And because also their brain is developing, the language is developing. And because of this, they use their children to act as language brokers and to translate for them. So there's a lot that is translated by these children for their parents. This could be individual items such as notes or letters from school, medical forms and bills, credit card statements, bank statements, forms, rental contracts, bills, job applications, doctor's office forms, instructions for new equipment, and so many more. That's what Weishurch and Alva found in their research, and the numbers weren't necessarily high for each of these items, but it did show that all the children that they researched did some form of translating. And the translating can also not be necessarily for items, but also for interactions with people. And this can have impacts on children and parents as well. And there's limited research done on the effects and impacts on these children. These impacts are both positive and negative. Research studies are found to be contrary to others, looking at the different impacts. Now, this all can depend on how much language brokering is occurring, as well as the type of situations that are taking place and circumstances. It's all different for every child and parent that uses language brokering, and so that needs to be taken into effect too as we look at these impacts. So if we first look at positive impacts for children, research from Burial et al. In 1998 did a study on 122 9th and 10th graders. And they found that language brokering overall had a positive effect on these adolescents. One positive impact was academic performance. There was an increase in this in students' grades and their education. They also found an impact on the different genres that these adolescents learned. They were able to hear and speak different genres that weren't common to their home language as they interacted with different people and they translated for their parents from one language to the other. They also built social self-efficacy as they translated for their parents. They were in different social situations where they would have to interact in different ways, and they felt that it built their self-efficacy. When we look on the flip side, Wise, Kirch, and Alva found research to have negative impacts on the children that they studied. They studied 36 fifth grade students, and they found overall that this language brokering didn't help build self-concept with the youth that they studied. They also found other negative impacts that included acculturative stress. As these children are learning to navigate both cultures, they receive stress as they are trying to keep their home culture that their parents are teaching them, as well as learning the majority culture and keeping that in mind as they translate between their parents and other people. They also found that these students felt embarrassed of their parents, and because their parents were learning English, and so when they translated and their parents didn't know, they were embarrassed, and this could cause them to be uncomfortable, which is the third point. Many of the students reported that they felt uncomfortable translating, and it also depended on the type of situation. Whether it was serious or not, they just felt uncomfortable doing it. And they also found low academic performance, which is contrary to the previous research that we just looked at. When we looked at the impacts for parents, we find that parents start to rely on their children to translate for them. They aren't able to communicate. Well, they can communicate, but it's not as well as they would like, and understanding is hard without being able to have that child there to speak full Spanish and translate it correctly for them. And this causes the authority in the relationship to change. As this parent relies on the child more, they don't have as much authority. This child, being the middle person, can influence and kind of change, if you want to say, the information that is being said to their parent, or distort it in different ways, whether it be serious or not. Parents use the children to interpretate and translate in serious situations that can affect the whole family. Besides family situations, there's also strong, serious situations that could really be stressful for a child, and as that parents, whether they do it on purpose or not, create that stress for that child by having them be the translator. So what should be done? We've looked at both the positive and negative impacts, and it's important that parents should work at learning English, or the majority culture language where they're living. This will help build a relationship with their child, but also will help them as they start their life in the United States. It helps them with their job, it helps them with understanding the government, with the school and their child, and overall it would be helpful for them to work at becoming bilingual. Schools and work could offer more bilingual information for parents, so information in Spanish and in English, so the parents can fully understand what's going on. And also having bilingual staff in schools especially is important, not only for parents, but for these students that are still learning English. This can help in understanding and help bridge that gap of language brokering between the child and the parent and the teacher. It'd be important for schools to incorporate different culture values that welcome families, and as these parents feel more welcome, and especially if there's bilingual staff, that language brokering could hopefully decrease, and parents could communicate effectively with teachers and staff. And schools as well as community programs, hold parent workshops that teach English that could help them. And it would also be important for parents to put limits on the amount of language brokering a child does, especially in serious situations where that stress really builds up on the child. As parents do that, that can help them build that relationship with their child. So, looking back at it all, we've seen both the positive and negative impacts. We know that the Latino population is growing, and so more than likely, so will language brokering. So as we push parents and children to become bilingual, this can help in understanding and building relationships and hopefully decrease the negative impacts for language brokering. Thank you.